Good afternoon, Southern Institutions meeting on Tuesday, January 24th. We have a full room today, and we're going to be going down through the governor's recommended FY 24-25 capital budget proposal, and we'll have people introduce themselves. I'm going to start on Tuesdays. So that we just don't get long-winded through the committee, so we can get to the work. But we'll just go around on Tuesdays and we'll introduce ourselves, and then we'll just introduce everybody else in the room. Starting with you, sir.
Wendy Harrison, Wyndham. I live in Brattleboro.
I'm Kristen Klauser. I'm the Secretary of Administration.
Sean Brown, Chief Operating Officer, Agency of Administration.
I'll be playing the part of the dormouse today. Eric Kilcorn, BGS Principal Assistant.
Jennifer Fitch, BGS Commissioner. Becky Wasserman, Legislative Counsel.
Noreen Hunter, Chittenden North.
Brian Collmore, Rutland District.
Linda Lehman, Committee Assistant.
Senator Russ Singles, Essex District, and Secretary. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yes.
So it's nice to meet those of you I haven't met before. Good to be back. I think we'll just start with a general overview of kind of how the spreadsheet is laid out, if that's helpful. And then from there, we can do some kind of a high level run through projects that are actually in the governor's recommended budget. But
What section do you want us in, Secretary?
sure. So if we could just open up to the spreadsheet itself, page one. Page one of the spreadsheet in your book. And Eric actually has some bigger copies.
There we go.
Oh, good.
There we go. Those will be helpful. Thank you.
Oh,
There you go. No, that's the right way to do it.
Eric, and those are the same page numbers that I have on here, right?
It should be. They're definitely the same section numbers, so if you just follow along the section numbers.
Thank you.
2019, right?
Yeah.
The week I had Senator.
Poor Eric, he's been through quite a bit.
You did.
I just work here.
Okay, so we'll start with the spreadsheet itself, and I'll just kind of orient us all to what we're looking at, and because it is a little different. I know some of you are new to this committee, but also it's a little different from former years. So we'll just orient you to the spreadsheet. You'll see two general kind of columns right in the middle. The first set of columns rather, are titled departmental requests. These are the FY24, FY25 requests that we received from departments and agencies for projects that they wanted to be considered in the capital bill. Not to get too far into the weeds yet, but typically we see requests that exceed available spending by about 50%. That was true this year as well. We had over $225 million of requests, and we have $108 million of debt capacity. And that debt capacity is a recommendation from CDAC, which is the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee. Each year they give a recommendation to the legislature and the governor on what amount of debt the state should take on in the following 2 years. This year, this recommendation was $108 million, and the governor's recommended capital bill stays within that $108 million of bonded dollars. We add to it, and I'll walk you through that. But with respect to the bonded dollars, we're at that CDAC recommendation. And historically, at least for the past, I think, 10 or 12 years, both the legislature and the governor have pretty firmly adhered to that recommendation from CDAC. So when you move to the next kind of set of columns, those are under what we call the governor's recommend. And this is the governor's recommended budget for FY24 and FY25. When you look in the FY24 column or section, there are actually 3 columns under that heading. and I'll explain what those are. The first is bonded dollars. And so this is our recommendation on how to use the 108 million of bonding capacity in CDAC's recommendation. So all of the bonded dollars will be in the columns for FY24 and FY25 that say bonded dollars. The next column that appears both in the FY24 and the FY25 section of the governor's recommend is titled CECF Cash Fund for short. So CECF is the Capital Expenditure Cash Fund. That was a fund that was established by the legislature last year upon the governor's and treasurer's recommendation. Last year, the legislature established the fund and seeded that fund with $25 million at one time. Additionally, there was a request from the legislature for the Department of Finance and Management, which sits within the Agency of Administration, in collaboration with the Treasurer's Office and the Joint Fiscal Office, to make recommendations on both usage of that fund and also how to set up a permanent funding source for that fund, which right now only has $25 million and has no permanent funding source associated with it. So the Finance and Management is currently in discussions with the Treasurer's Office and the Joint Fiscal Office to make sure we agree on assumptions and the like, but you will see a report and a recommendation from the Department of Finance and Management on a permanent funding source for that cash fund. To make a very, to abbreviate that report for you, it's the same recommendation we made last year, which is a percentage of 4% of the general fund each year be transferred into the cash fund. From that, we pay our debt service, and any remaining amount would be transferred into the cash fund for use the following biennium. So again, that's a very abbreviated version, but I just think it's relevant to the cash fund. What you will see this year, what you will see in the governor's recommended capital bill for usage of the cash fund, we have used that cash fund for things that are associated with projects that are planning, design, and feasibility. So short-term things, less than a 20-year lifespan, and targeted toward planning, feasibility, and design. So when you see in those columns, when you see, and we'll look at line 7, just as by way of example, you see $250,000 under FY24 Governor's Recommend on line 7 for cash fund. That's planning money. And whenever you see money in that section of the cash fund, it's either planning, design, or feasibility for an upcoming project. So you typically will see planning money in one biennium or 1 year. And then the following year, you'll start to see money shifted into the bonded dollar column. And that is for construction funds.
And can I jump in just for a second for the new members of the
Sure.
committee? So the idea of that fund is if that project never saw the light of day, we still spent the money to try to figure out whether we're going to do that project or not. So why should we hang on to that debt for 20 years or whatever the bond would be to do that? And so that's kind of what the idea of that fund, so that we're not bonding these monies that we use one time. We're never going to see that. We're not going to see the light of day of that. And so we don't carry that debt for all those years.
And just to put a finer point on that, one of the reasons we recommended establishing the cash fund is to save on those bonded dollars, because we typically spend over the lifespan on the interest of bonds, we spend an average of 52 cents per dollar over the course of that debt, which is significantly high. Our debt service currently is as of June 30th, 2022, it's over $577 million. And our debt service appropriation for this year, FY23 general fund appropriation for debt service is $73 million. So our debt service payment exceeds by $20 million what our bonding capacity is for this year, just to put some things into kind of perspective and a broader picture of why that cash fund, why we think that cash fund is so important. It's to reduce our reliance on debt.
Right. Can I ask a question?
Good question.
So that's just debt, that's not the other things.
That's general
Like-
obligation
like
debt
it's not
service.
pension or anything.
No, that's right. That is just our general obligation bonds.
Okay, over however long, over decades probably of.
20 years typically. Yep. Oh, I'm sorry.
I
No,
mean-
that's our total. That's right. That is our
The
total.
the payment due this year.
The payment due this year, the 73 million, is our payments on our total general obligation bonded debt,
Okay.
right? So that's
Right.
73 million is to pay down or to make payments on that 577 million.
Okay, great, thanks.
Just jumping back to the spreadsheet, so we've talked about the cash fund. You'll see yet another cash fund column in FY '24 under the governor's recommend. What that is a one-time general fund transfer. It's a transfer into the cash fund, but it is to pay, it is not to seed that fund with general fund money. Instead, it is to pay for certain capital expenses that were requested in the capital bill with one-time general fund surplus. Part of the reason for that is we had additional one-time, we had a lot of general fund surplus this year. And so we wanted, the governor wanted to optimize that and use an opportunity to pay for projects in cash instead of increasing our debt and using bonded dollars for that. Another reason why this year you'll see such a large amount in one time is we received a reduction from CDAC to the tune of just over $15 million. So for the last 4 years, we had $15 million more debt authorization than we have this year. It was about a 12%, a little over a 12% reduction. And as you can see, the need was not reduced,
Right.
didn't have a corresponding reduction. So we're using one-time general fund surplus to kind of, pardon the pun, but capitalize on the opportunity to pay with cash for some capital projects. There's a lot of money in that column, $62 million. Most of that is to pay for state match. So you'll see that there's IIJA state match in the A&R column. And we'll get to that when we get to that column, but just by way of kind of a quick overview. You'll see some IIJA match for drinking water and clean water state revolving fund in the A&R column. That $27 million leverages $390 million of state fund, of federal dollars.
That's a lot of money.
And it goes into FY '27. So what we are requesting is IIJA match, not just for this biennium, but rather to pay for state match for all of IIJA for those formula grants that we know will be coming. And we've done that because we believe that there will be leaner years ahead, and we want to make sure that we have the state match available so that we're not leaving federal dollars on the table. So a big chunk of that $62 million is the $27 million for A&R IIJA match. There's also $10 million for pollution control grants in the clean water section. That's enhanced. The IIJA has increased funding for pollution control grants. So that is state match for that increased funding for the pollution control grants. Again, hopefully that will last us through FY '27. So that's not just this biennium, it's through FY '27. But the one-time funding will come in through this general fund.
That 27 million buys an awful lot.
Sure does. It's about a, typically it's like a 1 to 4, right? We
Yeah.
usually get about $4 for every state match, but it's enhanced in this particular program in
I guess so.
IIJA.
Yeah.
Do you have to pay it now, or will we actually pay it out?
We'll pay it out over the course of
So
4
you put
years.
it in an account, make a tiny bit of interest.
That's right. So we'll pay it out over the course of 4 years.
Okay.
But each year, the state match is required to leverage that year of available formula grants
So
and
you'll have
funding. So we'll have it.
Great.
So the other, there are some other kind of one-time cash appropriations coming in that we'll get to when we get to those sections. The other large cash appropriation coming in that I just want to highlight here is $10 million going to Vermont State Colleges for infrastructure. So essentially their entire ask, Vermont State College's entire request, almost entire request, in section 8, we're proposing to pay for with cash through a one-time general fund surplus appropriation. So all in all, right, we have $108 million in bonded dollars. We have $62 million in a one-time general fund transfer to the capital bill to fund capital construction. And we have just over $19 million that we are proposing be transferred from the existing cash fund to pay for planning, design, and feasibility in this year's capital bill, for a total of just over $203 million. So unless there are some general questions about the spreadsheet and how that is set up, I'm happy to jump into the actual requests. And again, I know that you will hear from the individual departments and agencies who will come in and speak more substantively about the work that they're doing and the projects that they're requesting. So this will be a very kind of high level run through, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Cindy, you ready to move on?
Yep, I'm good.
Okay,
Okay,
we just.
all right, so we'll start with section 1, the Agency of Administration, which is really buildings and general services. This is there's a significant chunk of the capital bill that goes to BGS. But what you'll notice about this year that is a little different than last year's, there aren't as many large builds and large projects. And I will say that this is true kind of throughout the capital bill. What most of the money in the BGS section is going to are major maintenance, things like repairing roofs, repairing brick facades of buildings, boiler replacements, steam line replacements, HVAC issues. It's major maintenance stuff that is required, and it's expensive. Our buildings are beautiful, but they're old and hard to maintain. And so you'll see a lot of money in this section is really going towards those kind of major maintenance projects.
How updated are these estimates on these projects? Because we know the inflation is showing everybody. How recent are they up? They have all been estimated at the last month or 2 or 6 months, or?
That's right. Yep, they're updated. And typically BGS builds in a bit of a buffer there as well, right? So there's
Material, you can't get labor, you can't get parts.
that's right. So there's usually a contingency that's built into the projects because we know that costs fluctuate, but these are recent
Years
numbers.
ago, we could only hit on the money because it was so, I was certain, but today it's, I know in transportation, I bring back one project that was estimated for 10 million, and 16 million. I mean, it's
Yeah.
Crazy.
And you'll see some of that throughout, like, for example, the State House HVAC renovations, right? There's some additional money requested in this capital bill to finish that project. The project was funded, I think, 2 capital bills ago, but it has increased in price. It's also increased in scope, to be fair. But it has increased in price. So that there are some instances where you'll see some additional money being requested to compensate for those estimates that have gone up from inflation.
There's a market out there, get anything done, it's costly.
So the two things the two things from the one-time general fund surplus cash appropriation that I just want to highlight in the BGS section is a $2 million transfer into major maintenance. And again, that's so that BGS can keep up to date. You know, so some of the costs that we're seeing now is because there's a lot of deferred maintenance on our buildings. We just don't always have the money to fix it when it needs to be fixed. So we're proposing to sink some more money into BGS major maintenance so that they can stay on top of some of these, you know, major maintenance projects. There is another $1 million, which you'll see on line 32 of your spreadsheet. That is a cash transfer from the general fund surplus for EV charging stations for state buildings. And this is to just increase and expand our EV charging infrastructure, which we're doing elsewhere throughout the state, but this is specific to for state employees and state parking lots.
What do you think that that's gonna get us for charging stations, $1 million? What will that buy us in charging stations? Do you have a number of plugins or whatever?
We have a proposed plan and I will bring those numbers when I testify.
Okay, fair enough. Yep.
Is there discussion going on about school construction again? I know that the caucus at noon time, is that coming back into the picture? I know we haven't had it for years. I see there's $600 million wanted or $800 million. That built through school 20 years. I know it's been a long time since we had school. Is that into the mix this year?
So there's nothing in the capital bill that's directed towards school construction. I think the governor has indicated that he'd be open to thinking about some of the education fund surplus being directed towards capital expenses.
We are going to get back into school aid or construction.
Well, I don't think that we can afford to get into.
Well, I didn't think so either, but it was surprising you brought up the caucus today. They were talking about it.
Right.
And I was surprised to me because we hadn't discussed it at all. And now all of a sudden it's coming back into the picture because it's been a long time since we had school construction. Not that I'm supporting it one way or the other, but years ago, we used to spend a lot of money, 50, 60 million a year, something on school construction. There hasn't been any school construction, and I'm sure there's a reason for it because our population in school is declining. But I just wonder if it's coming back in, but I hope it doesn't, but I think it's something that we're thinking about, or somebody's thinking about.
Yeah.
Unless they hit it well in this budget, I went through all weekend long, I didn't find any.
No, there's nothing in the capital bill.
Right, I was gonna let you deal with that one.
I was surprised to hear that it was being brought up again. I don't know what.
It's called neglect.
Pardon me?
It's called neglect, and we have a lot of people from Burlington, right, who
Yeah, well.
want their school paid for by someone besides their taxpayers. That's human nature.
You open that door, and that's a big door to open.
I agree. I agree. There's PCBs in a lot of places too.
All right, I'm just curious if anybody else heard it but us.
No, I've been hearing it, but
Okay, yeah,
Yes.
that's interesting.
I'd be happy at another time to,
okay, yeah.
since I cover school construction, I can give the
Oh, good,
community an
yeah.
update on.
Just so we're aware of what's happening.
If anybody raises their hand, I don't see them, just yell it out, okay? I apologize for that, so, but if everybody's got anything, yes.
Eric Kilgore, BGS, on the subject of school construction, my recollection is that the Ed Committee had directed, that there's a study out there where they were doing a facility condition assessment. That may be back now, and that's probably what's igniting that conversation.
I'd be happy to go through that though.
Okay, that's all right, not today, but just bring it on the radar screen. Thank you.
Yes,
So, Madam Secretary, just so I know that I'm reading this correctly, on line 9, happens to be about Rutland. BGS has requested 18 million for a major renovation of the state office building, but if I'm reading across, nothing will be budgeted for FY '24 or '25, not till '26. Is that correctly read?
That's right. And that is, that's BGS's request as well. So what this spreadsheet doesn't show is the 10-year plan, which is also required to be submitted this year. The 10-year plan, so those out-year costs for those construction projects, those you'll see in the 10-year plan, which is at the very back of your binder. And so you can see, just sticking with that particular, the Asa Bloomer building.
Yeah.
You'll see in FY '26, there's some planning money. FY
Design.
'26 planning design money, and then you see what PGS is anticipating for construction money
Yeah, okay,
in FY '28 and '29.
all right. Thank you.
Sure. And so just sticking with that, because I do think it gets a little confusing in this particular column that says total project cost or biennial request.
Yeah.
In order to make the spreadsheet more reader friendly, we've hidden the 10-year column, the 10-year plan, and attached that as a kind of a separate document. But what we tried to do in this column is when there are annual appropriations, so things like major maintenance, column, line number 5, BGS major maintenance. That's an annual appropriation that BGS requests in every capital bill and gets an appropriation in every single capital bill. So in the total project cost or biennial request, when it's an annual request, that total will be the biennial request, because that request goes into perpetuity. So there's no real way to get a total value on that. When it is a particular project, whether the request to start building or start planning is in FY '24 and FY '25, or whether it is in the out years, like we just saw with the Asa Bloomer building,
Yeah.
when it is a specific project, the total project cost or biennial request amount is the total cost of the project.
Gotcha.
So for example, on line 10, the Montpelier State House HVAC renovations, that's just under 15 million total project costs. But you'll see that their request for this year is only 7.6 million.
Right.
And that's because there were appropriations in last year's capital bill to fund that project as well. So you see the total cost, and then you'll see either planning money and construction money in the out years in the 10-year plan, or sometimes you'll see construction money at a lesser amount, and that's because there was funding last biennium for that particular project.
Well explained, thank you.
So really the only kind of new project or one of the new projects in the BGS column is line 20, the White River Junction Courthouse. This is a major renovation to that courthouse. The total project cost is 12 million. We've funded 6 million this year to get that project started, and then next biennium we would round out that funding for that request. And that's a really significant renovation that the judicial branch has been asking for quite some time in the White River Junction. But that's kind of one of the only new builds that will actually be starting this year in the BGS section. There's some of, they're finishing up some projects, like the State House HVAC project, some door control projects in the correctional facilities. Then you have some planning money in here for other builds that will come down the road. And then you have the bulk, which is really the major maintenance issues that BGS is tackling this year.
So just a question, so line 8, is that the Cherry Street parking garage you talking about?
It is, I'll go there.
Well, there's no funding, so.
Well, there is some in some outlying years, and, but,
Reevaluate what's going on.
right.
Yeah, so
This is.
I can try, I was gonna do that at the end, but we'll do it right now. So what you'll see in the language section of the capital bill are under the property transaction section. The governor is requesting to sell 108 Cherry Street. So that,
Yeah, wait, I'm gonna find the
Aren't you happy
signature.
about that?
So that's why you're not seeing funding
Okay, great.
for that project, because we're requesting permission to sell that building.
Okay.
Okay.
Do we have to pay someone to take it off our hands, like IBM hatching?
Oh, boy.
I don't think we should have to pay someone to
Well,
take it
good,
off our
good.
hands. It's, you know,
Right spot.
it's a good spot in
It's
downtown
taken off
Burlington.
now, right?
Some of the best, some of the best real estate and all of Broad.
It'll be, it's not worth us putting 50 million.
I agree.
Right into it, but on the other hand, someone will get it and do well.
So,
Yeah. it's
Especially there's a big
it's
project that's
definitely a
gonna
prime
take off
spot.
right next door to
I'd like to pay someone to take it.
And then what you'll, just staying on 108 Cherry Street for a minute, there is a request to sell that property. So that's why you don't see any funding in that line.
Got it.
But then you'll also see at the end
Right.
of the capital bill, in section 18, the reallocation and transfer section on the last page.
Oh, yeah.
What you see there is about $14 million of reallocation from 108 Cherry Garage. And that is because for the past two capital bills, there have been appropriations for that project, which we haven't spent because the project hasn't started. And so because we are requesting to sell that property and proposing not to do any major renovations on that project pending sale, we have proposed to reallocate the $14 million that have been previously allocated in the capital bill for that project. And that adds to what you see on the bottom line. That's part of the $203 million of available funding, is that 14 million.
But let's just use that money wisely elsewhere.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Great.
So
Thank
have you estimated what you would receive from selling it? And would those revenues go into the capital fund, or are they free to go anywhere? I mean, can the governor propose that those go elsewhere?
So we can propose anything, but
Okay.
statutorily, they go back
They
into
actually go to section 2
section 2, which is BGS's section.
BGS's
Oh, so BGS.
by statute. You can not withstand anything.
And
That makes sense.
From BGS.
Yeah.
And we have I'm just looking at the appraised value of the property. I think it's around $14 million with a fixed parking garage.
Oh, which is less than the appropriations, right? About the same. For instance. Okay, cool. And I didn't mean to get us off track.
No,
We
that's
wanted
okay.
to go in a different way.
Well, now you know where $14 million came from. So
Okay.
it's important that you ask those questions.
Yeah, I mean, I only heard a little bit about it. What you all talking about, but it didn't seem to make sense to invest in that.
You're talking, it's endless because there's 4 floors of parking, there's 3 or 4 floors, and I don't know how many people we have in the building left that are state employees, because we're cutting down every year. And maybe we had 100, maybe we got 40, I don't know that now, but.
Yeah, so we have a little over 300 employees that, whose office is located in that building, that we would have to relocate if we sold that building. There is available already state-owned space in the Waterbury State Office Complex that could accommodate the folks in that building. It would also give some programmatic benefits to AHS to have folks, because the vast majority of employees in that building are Department of Health employees, which is part of the Agency of Human Services. And so it allows some opportunity to consolidate those groups and have the central, have some programmatic efficiencies with the central office and to better utilize our existing state-owned space.
Perfect time to do it.
We'd also keep a district office in Burlington because there are folks from the Economic Services Division, from the Family Services Division. There's even some folks from the Department of Health who provide direct services to Burlington folks and residents. And so we would continue to keep a district office in downtown Burlington somewhere through leased space. But then the remaining employees who aren't providing direct services in Burlington would likely be relocated to Waterbury to optimize that space and capacity down there.
Makes sense. Thanks.
So we'll move on to, unless there are any other questions about the BGS section. We'll move on to section 2, which is the Agency of Human Services. It's a actually perfect segue that was provided by 108 Cherry Street, because this is where you'll see the vast majority of that $14 million, which has been redirected to the DOC Women's Reentry Facility. So you'll see in FY24, there's $14 million proposed, and that's, you know, construction dollars to start construction on that facility. In FY24, there is some planning money that's paid from the cash fund at $1.5 million.
This is the correctional facility for women.
That's right. So it's a women's correctional and reentry facility. They're going to kind of combine those two facilities. So that's one of the, you know, new builds that you'll see in this capital bill, and it's where the bulk of the 108 Cherry Street money was reallocated to. So thank you for that segue. You'll also you'll also see there's a booking expansion in Human Services, which is something that DOC has been wanting to do for some time. So there is both planning money and construction money for that facility. You'll see planning money for a short-term secure stabilization facility for youth, justice-involved youth. There's been a lot of discussion about a temporary facility. That this is planning money for a potential permanent facility. And what you'll also see on line 40, youth inpatient beds at $9.5 million. That is a project that we have proposed to be funded through the BAA. So there's a $9.5 million line item in the BAA that would go to fund approximately 12 youth inpatient beds in the southwestern part of the state. That was originally a capital bill, a portion of that was a capital bill request, but we had cash available and we could speed that project up significantly by using cash now. So you'll see the entire project funded.
Yeah, it's good to hear that, because it's just a need that keeps on, it just seems like we were just keeping on talking about it. So to see that actually out there and started, it's nice.
That's the one where the permit process now, the facility.
No, so this is, this would utilize I forget the name of the hospital, Southwestern Vermont Medical Center, creating 12 new beds, youth inpatient beds in that facility.
Which one now do we have for the process of getting permitted?
The one in Newbury.
That's Newbury.
That's Newbury.
That's for justice involved youth through DCF.
I
This would be inpatient psychiatric facility
Thank you.
for DMH youth. Currently, the only facility that we have that services those youth is the Brattleboro Retreat. So this would be additional beds and diversifying that capacity a little bit as well. So that is in the BAA. You'll see that line item when the BAA comes through Senate appropriations. Section 3 is the judiciary section. What I want to point out about the judiciary section is, while there's this is planning money for the Berry Courthouse, the Washington County Superior Court renovations. They have some security concerns in that space, and so they'd like to move things around a bit and make some major renovations to that project, so to that courthouse. So you'll see planning money in here to get a better feel for what that looks like and the cost of that project. I just want to highlight that there are other judicial projects in the BGS section as well. So it's sometimes strange how that sugars out, but there are 2 judicial projects within the BGS section, and then there's this additional project in the judiciary section. So sometimes that gets confusing because they're different sections.
As long as it's intentional.
Yes. Section, I'm sorry,
No, I was just gonna say traditionally what's in the BGS section is just addressing deferred maintenance. What falls in other sections are programmatic requests, meaning the building doesn't function the way that I would like it to function. So that would be in their section versus we need a new boiler, a new roof, which would fall in our section.
Thank you.
Section 4 is commerce and community development. Most of these line items are kind of annual appropriations that you'll see for ACCD. The only thing I'll really highlight in this section, beyond saying that they're typically annual appropriations, is there is a request on line 55 for an IT project that you will see is not, is it 55? Sorry, I should have.
It is. It's 55.
Okay. So there's a request for an IT project that is not funded, and that's because we've worked really hard to get IT projects out of the capital bill. There was a time when IT projects were in the capital bill. I think we all know now that they have usually much less than a 20-year usable life. And so we've really tried hard over the course of the last 4 years to have the capital bill be things that are strictly, sticks and bricks, real construction stuff, and obviously planning and design. We did that 2 years ago by moving the AHS IE&E project, which is a major IT project. We moved that out of the capital bill. And last year, we moved BGS engineering staff costs out of the capital bill to try and really purify the capital bill to be pure construction, mostly because, we hate to use bonded dollars and pay interest on things like staff costs and IT projects. So wanted to highlight why that is not in there. And we're working with ADS to try and fund that project through either the IT modernization fund or other IT money that we have available. Section 5 are the building community grants. This is everybody's favorite section of the capital bill. These are grants that I think were started about 10 years ago, potentially, maybe even longer than
By
that.
Governor Scott.
By Governor Scott, which is why it's everyone's favorite section of the capital bill. At least everyone in the administration's favorite section.
Very good idea.
So what I'll highlight about this section is last biennium, because these grants are typically oversubscribed by double, sometimes triple, last biennium, we increased the funding for these building communities grants. This year, you'll see that same increased funding carried over. And despite the increase in funding, they continue to be oversubscribed and really, really highly utilized by our communities. So we've kept that increased funding amount and carried that over into this year's capital bill. The Agency of Education, again, that is kind of an annual request that is always in there. That's in section 6. Section 7, University of Vermont, that's their major maintenance line. Again, it's an annual request. Section 8, Vermont State Colleges. What I want to highlight about this section is this is one example of a one-time transfer from general fund surplus into the capital bill to pay almost entirely at the requested amount. Major maintenance, transportation or transformation, infrastructure need requirements, and then they're also making significant renovations and kind of reconfigurations of 2 halls, one on the Randolph campus and one in Lindenville. The Agency of Natural Resources is next. This is a a fairly dense section of the capital bill. The things that I want to highlight in here, or maybe I should say, well, I'll continue to say highlight. You'll see the 27 million for those IIJA grants. And that's why you'll see those twice. So line 100, state match to supplement the federal EPA Clean Water Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. That is a supplemental allocation for the IIJ increase. What you see below it on line 101, the state 20% match to federal EPA, this is the annual allocation that ANR gets, and well, I should say gets, they are required to put up a state match, but assuming they put up the state match, they receive the 20% state match, they receive federal EPA money for this on an annual basis. The line 100 is the enhanced money and the supplemental allocation that's coming in through the IIJA. And that's where you'll see the $27 million of one-time general fund surplus come in. You'll notice that is not there on line 101 because that's their annual appropriation that's usually funded through the capital bill. And so we kept that the same. Meaning funded it through the capital bill with bonded dollars.
Yep.
Question, are those typically used, are those funds typically given out? All of is all of this budget typically used?
Yes, yes.
That's funny, sorry.
Yes, yes. So and again, these are just the formula grant section. So there's some other, the IIJA also has competitive grant opportunities, but this is just formula grants at amounts that ANR thinks that can be distributed and utilized by the municipalities.
Right, I've wondered for a while actually if all that funding is actually used by the municipalities.
Yes.
So it is.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Or look at you, but you wouldn't be involved.
So then the other kind of transfers that we can, well, actually, I think that's the only, no, I'm sorry. The other transfer you'll see from one-time general fund to the capital bill is a $3 million transfer on line 95. That is for 2 maintenance facilities. What I want to point out with respect to this line item, you'll notice that the department requested $7.8 million for those for construction of those 2 facilities. And, you know, based on our limited funding this year and just the need to kind of tighten our belts, we've reduced that with a one-time cash allocation of $3 million. And in doing so, we've kind of changed the design of those buildings to kind of to bring that cost down a bit. So you'll see, for those of you who looked at the planning and design money and some of the proposals in last year's biennium, when the cost came back, it was higher than we felt comfortable with. And so we've reduced the cost by changing the design of those maintenance facilities, but still believe we're able to give ANR what they need, but at a reduced price. So I wanted to highlight that because as you're looking at the spreadsheet, you'll see a pretty significant disparity. And then it's not that we're just funding a portion of that project. We believe this will fund it.
By resizing.
That's right. And changing the materials mostly as well. Okay. The other, just kind of jumping down to the clean water section, just so folks are aware that this is the Clean Water Board meets and makes recommendations. This year, their recommended funding level was $10 million. You'll see that we're funding less than that. And the reason for that is because there was some congressionally directed spending that came in to ANR, which reduced the Clean Water State Revolving Fund amount required for state match by about $850,000. So that's why you'll see the discrepancy between the $10 million and the actual 9.1 of funding. Moving on to section, and again, I'm happy to answer, but just shout them out if you have them.
You're doing well, doing very well.
Moving on to section 11, military. Most, we have fully funded their major maintenance request. Most of what is to be highlighted in the military section is they have some big projects coming up in the outer years, and you'll see that on the 10-year plan. Many of these are kind of a plan to regionalize their readiness centers. And so you'll see they have a plan to sell some buildings and to build some new centers. And so those are some significant costs, but they are out in the 10-year plan. You won't see them in this biennium. Public safety, section 12, is somewhat the same. You'll see some planning and design money for their.
We're gonna get one down there finally. Facility.
You'll see planning and design money for two major builds, which is the Rutland Field Station and the Special Teams Facility and Storage Facility.
They need it.
Again, this is planning money that you'll see in this capital bill, and in the 10-year plan, you'll see those out-year construction costs for those facilities. The thing I'll highlight with the Special Teams Facility and Storage is that the intent is there's special teams are kind of here, there, and everywhere in some leased space, and so the intent is to pull those together in one state-owned space. So there'll be some operational savings for those moves as well if it gets funded. Section 13 is ag. What you'll see here is finishing construction on the Big E. Last year, those of you who were here, there was some planning and some initial construction money for the Big E building in Springfield, and this is to finish that building. And then their major project this year is the Vermont Environmental Lab heat plant. They are currently using the Vermont State College's boiler, which is not large enough to sustain their facility, and also doesn't operate when the college is not in session. And the lab is there all year round. So this project is to make sure that the lab has what it needs, and BGS and Ag have had a very trying time keeping up with the undersized boiler. BGS in fact has to staff it on the weekends to make sure that it doesn't turn off and ruin the lab equipment. So there's a lot of staff time that has been poured into that, so that this is our attempt to fix that.
So that 300 is for planning?
So the 300 is for planning, and then you'll see construction starting in FY25. Section 15, the VHCB, you'll see VHCB also in the clean water section. They have some funding in the clean water section. This, this is funded at their requested ask. Vermont Veterans Home in section 16. Again, it's unfortunately the theme of this year's capital bill, which is, major renovations, right? So this is the heat and boiler, which is well past its end of life. And so they need a generator and boiler replacement at Vermont Veterans Home. There's also some planning and design money for major renovation to one of their residential wings. And you'll see $1 million for an elevator upgrade. Currently their elevator is really struggling and they can't find parts or services to maintain it. And that's an essential component of their operations there. So you'll see funding for the elevator in the Vermont Veterans Home section as well. Finally, while there's no capital request for section 17, the Agency of Transportation, we have it in the capital bill because it was a department request, but we are funding that maintenance facility through a proposed one-time GF transfer to the St. Albans District Maintenance Facility for AOT.
Yeah, I guess you're getting out of the city, finally, they're gonna move out of the city.
Be closer to the interstate, right?
Yeah, right now, they gotta go through all downtown St. Albans. Interstate.
This is match, correct?
That's right, thank you, Sean. So this is state match for that facility.
Okay, okay. The 3.5.
The 3.5 is the
Okay.
state match, yeah.
Okay.
So then just to round out the spreadsheet, you'll see section 18 are reallocations and transfers. The vast majority of those are the 108 Cherry Street, which we already talked about. There's also a greenhouse, $26,000 from AHS. Thank you, AHS, for that reallocation. I'm sure the repo committee will find some more. They always do. So we'll see what they come up with, but the major reallocation there is from 108 Cherry Street. Section 19 just illustrates kind of the three sources of funding for this year's capital bill: the bonded dollars, the one-time transfer from the general fund, and then governor's recommended utilization of the cash fund. The reason we titled it that is there's still money in the cash fund. There was a $25 million appropriation last year to seed that fund. We're recommending using just over 19 million of that fund.
So there'll still be 6.
Right. And then the last column is just total spending.
You've done your homework on this project. You must spend some time with this.
When I came to AOA in 2020, I was handed the capital bill. I knew nothing
Yeah.
about capital construction whatsoever, which makes it challenging when your governor knows a lot about it.
That's true.
So, but I think the capital bill is such a lovely window into state government, and it was a great way to kind of learn what everyone is doing and how it impacts their operations. And so despite moving into the secretary position and slowly handing over the capital bill to Sean, I just can't quite get rid of it because I do really like it. I think it's super interesting. So, but you will be hearing a lot more from Sean during the course of the session, who just joined AOA in October as our COO and really did a tremendous amount of work with Eric and BGS on the capital bill. So he's better versed than I. Can answer questions if you have some.
Got a good secretary, and Williams in charge of general services. He does well. Commissioner.
Yeah.
Oh, Senator Mazza just gave you an upgrade.
I know, right?
I think he just fired me and promoted him. I'm not sure.
He's gonna try to find something to say something nice about Eric in a minute.
That's against the rules.
Try your best.
He's good at what he does.
Okay.
We have a lot of fun together.
Well, thank you so much for
Committee,
having
any
me.
questions? Why we have everybody here? Good job. Yeah, very nice job. And if anybody's got any questions?
And hopefully, when you get the capital bill from the House, it looks exactly like this.
Yeah.
Right?
I think we're gonna have a lot of fixing to do.
We'll make it.
Yeah, we'll have a lot of fixing to do. We'll try to have
Thank
it
you so much
resemble.
for having me.
Thank
If
you.
you have any questions in the meantime, you know how to get a hold of us. We're happy to answer them.
Thank you.
Thank all of you for spending the day.
Who's here?
That makes sense.
So he owns the-
Where's the wall?